Hello, Texas 4-H. My name is Molly Keck, and I am with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Department of Entomology. I am also one of the authors on the 4-H Entomology Guidelines. These videos were developed to help you better understand what you need to know for the Entomology Identification Contest. Remember, for each specimen, you need to know their common name, what order they're found in, what their life cycle is, what type of mouthparts they have, their host or location or where they are found, and their significance. Are they a pest, beneficial, inconsequential, or variable? Hymenoptera are the bees, the ants, and the wasps. Because there's so many of these insects, their host is going to vary, and they are going to vary in their significance. They're either going to be beneficial pests or one may be variable as well. They all have a complete life cycle, and they have chewing mouth parts, both as the adult and as the larvae, although some have a variable form of mouth part, such as bees. They have kind of a lapping mouth part. We're going to first cover the specimens that everyone needs to know, juniors, intermediates, and seniors. And then there are some separate specimens that seniors only need to know that we will finish up at the end of this video. Our first specimen are bumblebees. Bumblebees are beneficial. They are a big, giant, fluffy bee with a fuzzy abdomen. This is important for seniors when you're comparing them to another type of bee that looks very similar. The host for these are meadows. Carpenter bees tend to be found nesting in the ground or in voids somewhere. It might be an empty stump, but they really like kind of an open area, pasturey area, meadow, places where the soil isn't super compacted and they're able to excavate out their nests. They tend to nest in the ground. They are social insects within their colony, and it's not truly social like a bumblebee is, because the colony will die off in the wintertime and have to start all over again in the spring. But they are somewhat social. They have a type of sociality. And oftentimes where one builds a nest, you might find multiples building a nest in the same spot. These are important beneficial pollinators. Many of these species of bumblebees pollinate certain plants better than honeybees do, and they're certainly pollinating a lot of our color, our wildflowers and things out in our landscape. And they're visiting these flowers to pick up pollen and also nectar. They utilize lapping mouth parts, which are kind of in between chewing and sucking, but they have a big long tongue where they lap up the nectar, and they do have the ability to chew. Cicada killers are a wasp that are considered beneficial because they are predatory and they're helping keep cicada populations in check. They are not harmful. They really do not want to sting you. You have to really earn the sting. The host for these is the soil or the ground, because this wasp will sting and paralyze a cicada. It will first make a burrow or a tunnel in the ground, lay its eggs in there, sting and paralyze a cicada, drag it into that burrow, and then when the egg hatches and that little larvae is there, that's what it's being fed, are cicadas. So they're a predator, they're not harmful, they're helping keep other insects in check as far as populations go, and so we consider these to be beneficial. Now, one of the biggest differences between wasps and bees is that wasps really aren't very hairy, and they also tend to be more predatory. So if you take a look at this cicada killer wasp, he's very shiny. He doesn't have a lot of hairs on him. Versus bumblebees and other bees have a lot of fuzz and hair on their bodies. So that's one big way to tell the difference between a wasp or a bee. Honeybees are another beneficial bee. Although all bees and wasps can sting, the benefits that they do often outweigh the risk of their sting. Honeybees are the most important insect to man, the most valuable insect to man, and that's because of the pollination that they do primarily in agricultural systems, pollinating cotton, pollinating food that we consume. They do pollinate some flowers, and they may pollinate things in your landscape, in your garden, but in agricultural systems, that's really where they thrive. In addition to being a fabulous pollinator, they provide us with some other byproducts, including honey and wax, and also propolis. Honey is what they produce from nectar. When they thin the nectar out or thicken the nectar up and reduce all of the moisture, it turns into a syrup that we call honey. Wax is what they use to build their home out of, and propolis is kind of the glue that they use. It's from tree resin plant resin, and a little bit of wax to seal and glue things up. The host for a honeybee are flowers. They're going to be found on flowering plants and live inside of a hive and are considered truly social insects. The colony doesn't die off in the winter. It's the same queen throughout the year. And they also have the lapping mouth parts. Mud daubers are a type of thread-waisted wasp that are found around buildings. We consider these to be beneficial because they help reduce populations of other pest insects, also known to be a very good predator for a lot of different spider species. They can be a nuisance because the nest that they make, the little mud nest that they make, will be glued to like the inside of your garage or to buildings, and so that can look ugly in a home, but overall they are considered to be beneficial. Mud daubers also take on a variety of looks, but I would be looking for that thread or that really skinny waist, that long skinny waist between the thorax and the abdomen. Paper wasps are a new addition to the contest as of 2025. Paper wasps are a pest wasp. There's a variety of different species of these Polistes species of wasps. Their hosts are around houses where they build these inverted upside down nests that are naked or open, where you can see that little larvae poking its head out. The sealed up sections of that start of that nest are pupa. The species vary. They can be brownish, reddish. They can be also kind of a yellow and brown stripe, but all of these are paper wasps. So these two kind of looks or coloration patterns are typical of most species of paper wasps. And while they're generally considered a pest because they build their nests by homes and they can sting us, they are important predators and help reduce certain populations of pest insects such as caterpillars. There's a couple of ants that you need to be aware of. One is the red harvester ant. A red harvester ant is a completely red ant. When you look at it, it's got some fuzz on it. The other thing that I notice about it is that the head kind of has lines or grooves in it. But the other big trick about them is that under their chin or the bottom side of their face, of their head, they have a bunch of hairs. So that's having a hairy chin is very characteristic of the red harvester ant. For the contest, if you're asked what the specimen is, you need to say red harvester ant, not red ant, and not just harvester ant. Red harvester ant in order to get the full credit. These are considered inconsequential. They tend to be found around pastures, and most of the time they're just out there and not causing any damage to anything. They a lot of times are considered beneficial because they're a primary food source for the Texas horned lizard. Sometimes they are a pest in pastures for some farmers, but for the most part, they're not causing any damage when they're not close to the home. While they can sting, you really have to grab them in order to earn a sting from them, but the sting can be pretty painful. And one thing that they'll do is make a big giant circle where they've cleared the vegetation from around the nest. No grass is growing around there. And in the very center is the hole where they're coming and going. So it's a big flat disc where they've cleared out the vegetation. Another ant is the red imported fire ant. The big difference between them and the red harvester ant is that they are very smooth and shiny in color, and the abdomen tends to be black, whereas the head and thorax are red. So they're not a solid red color, they're kind of two-toned. These are considered a pest, and they are found in pastures and lawns. Their sting is very painful. They're very aggressive ants. They're the only ants that are as aggressive as they are. And the other thing about them, especially for seniors that I would know, is that at the end of their antenna, it ends in a club, a two-segmented club. So there's two little segments that end larger than the rest of the antenna. Velvet ants are not technically ants. Velvet ants are actually wingless wasps in the female form. The males actually have wings. These are considered a pest. They have a pretty painful sting. A lot of times people will call them cow killers, not because they would necessarily kill a cow with their sting, but the pain is that severe. They are found in soil on the ground, nesting in the ground. Some of them can actually be nesting with other insects, and they'll parasitize these insects, lay their eggs in these insects. Velvet ants are fuzzy from head to end. Sometimes some of them have not as hairy of an abdomen, so I would familiarize with a lot of different looks of the different types of species of velvet ants. They can be solid black. They can be primarily red. They can be black with the tip of the abdomen being an orange or a red. They can be red and orange. So they have a lot of different looks to them, but they all have a very fuzzy, very furry, fuzzy body, almost like a stuffed animal or like a Sesame Street character. And then yellow jackets are a type of wasp that sometimes gets confused for either bees or paper wasps. While these do produce a paper mache type of a nest that they enclose, and so it's not naked and exposed like a paper wasp, the big difference is that these are very yellow and black and often striped and patterned. They're a little bit smaller. They're not as elongated as a paper wasp and tend to be a little bit more stout, almost like a honeybee is. In this image, it shows their nest. There's some void or hole behind this rock wall, and they have filled it up. And they will coat and kind of line the outside of their nest and close it in this paper product. Nests are made of chewed fiber. This is a queen. So this is the queen compared to her workers right here. But you can see from this image, they're very yellow and black striped. So that they're not brown and black kind of striped or brown and yellow striped like the paper wasp. These are considered a pest. The host for these is going to be the ground, but they will nest in any void. So this is behind a rock wall, and they found a hole that they're going to fill there. It might be a stump. It might be a hole in a tree. But primarily, they're found nesting in the ground. Their sting is incredibly painful. And once one comes out and stings you, the rest are going to smell that alarm pheromone, and they're all going to come out and try to attack also. They tend to primarily be predators, feeding on other insects such as caterpillars, but they will also do some foraging on nectar to try to get some of the sweet nectar. So that concludes the junior and intermediate Hymenoptera. Seniors, stay on so you can learn the species that you need, the additional species that you need to know for only seniors. And our first one are the carpenter bees. Carpenter bees look a whole lot like bumblebees in size and shape and in fuzziness, but if you look very closely, a carpenter bee has a shiny hiney or a naked abdomen with no hair on it. Bumblebees are very, very fuzzy. Remember that because this is a good one for you to get a specimen of because it's very easy to trick you with it. They are considered a pest. And what they'll do is the carpenter bee has these real strong mandibles that it will use to chew holes in wood. And they particularly love very thick fence posts. They like cedar, so they can cause damage on porches and decks, different posts in wood around the home. They do some pollinating, so they do have some benefits to them, but by and large, these are damaging. Horntails are variable insects. They can be pests in some situations and in other times they are not. They're a very interesting Hymenoptera because all the other Hymenopterans have a pinched waist. You can identify them because they have a skinny waist. Horntails do not. The host for these are logs. The larvae are known to eat wood, but also sometimes dead logs. So they can either eat live wood and kind of cause damage to trees, or they can be helping reduce the trash that is, wood and log that has. Ichneumon wasps are very interesting looking wasps. They tend to have a really long, elongated abdomen, and females have a super, super long ovipositor. They're considered beneficial. These are parasitic. They lay their eggs in prey, and oftentimes they'll lay their eggs in the prey, in the larvae of boring beetles. And so somehow they have heard the beetles in the tree insert their long, skinny ovipositor, and that ovipositor finds the larvae and lays its egg inside of it. So they're very interesting. They can have a number of different looks. The bottom picture is a really typical Ichneumon wasp, but the one on top is also one. So just long, elongated body, skinny waist, but a super, super long abdomen. Their size can range. It can be 1/4 of an inch to over an inch, a variety of colors, and then with the ovipositor behind it, they can be incredibly much longer. Leaf-cutting bees are a bee with chewing mouthparts. So our bumblebees and our our bumblebees and our honeybees had lapping mouth parts, but these guys have chewing mouth parts. They are considered beneficial because many species are pollinators, and so the host are flowers, but some of them can cause some minor damage to plants. They will cut like a 3/4 perfect circle in the edge of a leaf and take it to line their nests. They make they're solitary bees. They line the nest with these cuttings and lay their eggs inside of that. The big difference between a leaf-cutting bee and a honeybee is that honeybees typically are more brown. Leaf-cutting bees tend to have a flatter abdomen, which you may or may not be seeing in this image, but their body has white hairs on it versus kind of a yellow hair. And then sawflies are another one of the hymenopterans that have a broad waist to them. They don't have that really skinny waist. They are considered a pest. They're very interesting because their larvae have chewing mouth parts, so do the adults, and the larvae will chew on plant material. So they almost act like caterpillars. So sometimes you think it's caterpillars feeding on a plant, when in reality it's actually a type of hymenopteran. And our tarantula hawk is a giant wasp. It's usually black, metallic looking, maybe blue even, but it has very dark amber colored wings. They also have curly antennae, and these are considered beneficial. They're found in woodland areas. You would find them in a park, a nature park. Sometimes you can find them in your backyard, but they're so large, and what they'll do is they also will make a burrow in the ground. The adults will sting a tarantula and pull it into the ground to allow their larvae to develop and feed on the tarantula. There are tarantula hawks, and then there's also spider wasps. Spider wasps tend to be a little bit smaller than these guys, whereas the tarantula hawks have this typical blue-black look, curly antenna, and deep, dark amber. And the final ant and hymenopteran that you need to know are the Texas leaf-cutting ants. So I would know it all the way, Texas leaf-cutting ant. These are definitely pests. They will strip leaves and take them into their nest. They also get the name town ant or cut ant. They're found in wooded areas, woodlands, so they can also be found out in pastures, but they tend to be found where there's a lot of trees and a lot of foliage around. And the difference between them and the red harvester ant and the red imported fire ant is that if you look at their body, they have a ton of spines. 3 pairs on the thorax, one other real big one on the thorax, even one on this little connector right here. So if you see a lot of spines, multiple spines, you're looking at. What's interesting about them is even though they cut the leaves, they don't actually feed on the leaves. They'll carry these leaves into the ground and into their nest, and their gigantic nest with multiple queens, and they'll farm fungus off of the leaves. So they'll chew on the leaves and they'll grow fungus on the edges of it. And they feed on the fungus instead of on the actual leaves. But they need the leaves in order to make the fungus. So they can be a big problem for gardeners and others when they strip their plants seemingly overnight. For more information, study guide materials, and more, please visit the Texas A&M Entomology Department Extension website. Visit entomology.tamu.edu/extension. Scroll down and click on 4-H and Youth Programs.